There is a field in Clark County, Alabama, where nothing grows. The soil is pale and red, the color of rusted iron, and when the wind drifts across it, it carries the scent of clay and something faintly metallic. The locals avoid it. They say the ground is cursed, that it remembers. Beneath it lie 21 graves, though the old church record lists only 19 names. The two that are missing belong to the Delaney twins. Eleanor and Elise Delaney were born in 1822, the same hour, to a plantation family whose wealth was built on the broken backs of others. They were inseparable, identical in face and temperament, bound by something beyond sisterhood. As children, they would speak in murmurs only they understood. Servants said if one was cut, the other would flinch. If one wept, the other awoke from sleep with red eyes. By the time they reached womanhood, their bond had taken on a different kind of shadow. They shared everything, their room, their dresses, even their secrets. And eventually, they shared Isaiah. Isaiah was a young slave, tall, strong, with eyes that met the ground but saw everything. He belonged to the Delaney estate, born on its soil, never allowed to leave. The sisters, however, treated him differently. They called him to the house at night, sometimes together, sometimes separately, and one summer, both sisters became pregnant. The preacher called it the devil's work. Their father called it shame. But the truth, the one buried beneath the cotton fields, was much darker. Clark County was a place that believed in silence. It thrived on forgetting. When something shameful happened, the people simply erased it, from memory, from record, from talk. The Delaney scandal was the kind of sin that could never be spoken aloud, yet everyone knew. Eleanor and Elise stopped appearing at church. Their father, Edward Delaney, withdrew from public life, shutting the estate gates and dismissing half the staff. The preacher said the family was under spiritual repair. But the servants whispered another story, that at night, two female voices could be heard arguing upstairs, sometimes sobbing, sometimes laughing like children lost in a fever dream. Then, one morning, Isaiah was gone. His sleeping quarters were found empty, his few belongings burned behind the stables. The sheriff wrote it off as escape. The family said nothing. But one housemaid swore she'd seen the twins dragging something heavy toward the creek at dusk, wrapped in linen, trailing red into the grass. The sisters gave birth weeks apart. No doctor was called. No midwife was allowed past the gates. When it was over, only one infant's cry echoed through the halls. And then, silence. The following winter, the mansion's windows were boarded shut. The family chapel was sealed, its door nailed from the inside. No one saw the sisters again. But on nights when fog rolled in from the swamp, some claimed to hear two women humming. The same tune, the same tone, coming from beneath the earth. 20 years later, in 1866, Reverend Samuel Hale arrived in Clark County to rebuild what the war had left in ruins. The Delaney plantation, overgrown and hollow, caught his attention. Locals warned him away, but he was a man of faith, proud of reason and redemption. Inside the abandoned mansion, he found remnants of a life frozen mid-breath. Dust-covered cribs, dresses rotted to lace, a mirror shattered down the middle, as if by two blows struck in perfect unison. In the study, he found a ledger that wasn't for crops or wages. It was a journal, written in two alternating hands. One entry, signed Eerie. He says he loves her more. But we are the same. How can he choose between a reflection and its shadow? Another, signed L, followed. She watches me when I sleep. I can feel her heart beat in my chest. If one of us must have him, then one of us must die. Reverend Hale stopped reading after a final passage smeared in ink and blood. We buried him by the creek. The ground still moves. I hear him beneath it when the moon is full. The Reverend left that night and never returned. But before leaving town, he told the church council something strange, that he had seen two cribs, side by side, both filled with bones small as sparrow wings. By the turn of the century, Clark County was trying to modernize, but the Delaney legend persisted. Some said one twin survived and lived in the attic until her death. Others believed a child had lived, a child born of sin, hidden to protect the family name. In 1902, a census record listed a woman named Delaney living alone near the ruins of the old estate. She claimed to be 78. But witnesses described her as ageless, skin pale as candle wax, hair white, but eyes a deep, unnatural blue. She never spoke to anyone except the children who wandered too close. Those children told their parents strange things. That the woman had two shadows. That she spoke with two voices. That she carried a cradle and whispered names into the empty air. When one of those children went missing, the townspeople burned her cottage to the ground. Inside the ashes, they found no body. Only a mirror, cracked down the center, and two sets of footprints leading into the woods. One light, one heavy, both bare. They say the ground by the creek still sinks every few years, as though something underneath is shifting, trying to breathe. And the church records still list only 19 names. The Delaney plantation rotted quietly over the next few decades, but the earth around it refused rest. Farmers who tried to till the soil near the old creek said their plows struck something soft just beneath the surface, something that gave way like flesh. One man unearthed what he thought was a tree root until it revealed a human finger bone, still wrapped in damp linen. No one stayed long. Livestock that grazed there sickened and died. Crops turned brittle and white. Even the wind avoided that stretch of field, as though sound itself was afraid to pass through. The place was marked in county ledgers as infertile, but the people who lived nearby used a different word, cursed. Children dared each other to run through the property at night. None ever made it to the other side. One boy returned shaking, saying he had seen two women standing by the creek, holding hands, their hair floating as if underwater. When asked what they were doing, he said, they were waiting for their baby to wake up. The sheriff tried to quiet the rumors. He ordered a shallow excavation, but every man who worked that dig quit before sundown. They said the ground pulsed. They said they could hear a heartbeat under their feet. After that, no one touched the land again. The field became a scar of red earth surrounded by whispering pines, a place where time felt wrong, and the air itself seemed to remember what the world had tried to forget. In 1919, a historian named Clifford Ames came from Mobile to document the forgotten plantations of southern Alabama. He had read a brief mention of the Delaney twins in an old church registry and saw in their tragedy a chance to make his reputation. When he arrived, the townsfolk refused to guide him. The old preacher crossed himself and muttered that some history don't want to be spoken. Ames laughed. He was a man of reason, proud and skeptical. He believed stories of hauntings were relics of ignorance. He set up camp in the decaying house, recording his notes by candlelight. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third, he woke to find the journal he had placed on the desk open to a page he hadn't written. The handwriting was careful, slanted, feminine. It read, "We never left. We only sank deeper." Ames searched the room, furious and unnerved. The doors were locked from the inside. He stayed one more night, determined to catch whoever was playing tricks. In the morning, his horse was gone, the gate wide open, and the soil outside the front steps freshly disturbed, as if someone had knelt there, digging with bare hands. When the sheriff came weeks later to investigate, they found Ames's journal lying near the creek. The last words scrawled inside read, "The earth breathes in pairs." No body was ever found. Only 2 sets of footprints circling the old water's edge. In 1934, during the height of the Depression, Clark County's new preacher, Reverend Milton Harrow, decided to consecrate the cursed land. The church was dying, the people restless, and he thought a public cleansing might restore faith. He gathered the congregation at dawn. They sang hymns as they poured oil and water over the soil, praying that whatever lay beneath would be forgiven. By noon, a strange smell rose from the ground, sweet and rotten, like lilies left too long in the sun. Harrow pressed on, shouting scripture. But before the final verse, the earth cracked open beneath his feet. The hole wasn't deep, just wide enough to show what looked like 2 faces pressed together under the clay. One appeared young, the other aged. Both had their eyes open. The preacher dropped his Bible. The crowd fled. He stood there trembling, muttering that he had seen the image of a shared soul. That night, he hung himself in the bell tower. The townspeople sealed the church doors the next morning. No one rang the bells again. The Delaney field became off-limits, fenced and forgotten, but the stories didn't stop. Travelers said that on certain nights, the sound of a lullaby drifted across the fields, 2 women singing softly, their voices perfectly matched, rising and falling like the slow breathing of the dead. In 1949, nearly a century after the twins' disappearance, a census taker visited the outskirts of Clark County. Among the isolated shacks and tenant farms, he recorded a woman who called herself Anna Delaney, age 27. She had no birth certificate, no known parents, and no record in any parish. Her eyes were an impossible color, one blue, one gray, and when she spoke, her voice carried a faint echo, as if two tones overlapped. The census man asked where she was from. She smiled faintly and said, "I was born from the ground." He laughed nervously and noted her entry, but later claimed that as he left, she whispered something that froze his blood. "Tell them we are still waiting for our other half." He reported the encounter to his supervisor, who dismissed it as local eccentricity. But when officials returned months later, the shack was gone. In its place was a shallow depression in the earth, shaped almost like a cradle. The file on Anna Delaney was marked untraceable and buried in the state archives. It would have remained forgotten until a university researcher reopened it decades later and noticed something chilling. On the edge of the census form, in handwriting that wasn't the enumerator's, were 5 faint words. "Two of us. One body left." In 1953, an auction was held for the remnants of the Delaney estate. Most of the items were worthless, rotted furniture, moldy books, and tarnished silver. But among the pieces was an ornate mirror framed in blackened oak. The auctioneer described it as a split clean down the center, yet perfectly balanced. A woman from Montgomery bought it and hung it in her parlor. Within a week, her husband claimed he saw 2 reflections of her, one smiling, one expressionless. She said he was drunk. Then, one morning, she woke to find the mirror covered in condensation, though the room was cold and dry. Written in the fog, in neat, feminine script, were the words, "You only see one." She smashed the glass in terror, but each fragment showed a slightly different version of her face. One older, one younger, one crying, one whispering. The shards were collected and stored by police after her breakdown, though the case was later closed as domestic hysteria. Years later, an archivist handling those fragments noticed something strange. When the pieces were arranged together, even loosely, the faint reflection of 2 identical women appeared behind the viewer, standing side by side, holding something small and still between them. He sealed the fragments away, labeling the box Delaney artifacts, "Do not display." The next morning, the archivist was found dead in his office. The mirror pieces were missing. Only the faint smell of lilies lingered. In 1961, the state commissioned a geological survey to assess the land where the Delaney plantation once stood. The site was to be repurposed for agriculture. A young geologist named Harold Benton led the project. His notes, later recovered from his abandoned truck, read like a descent into madness. "The soil here is alive. The moisture patterns pulse. Instruments detect low vibrations, steady, rhythmic, like breathing." On the 3rd day, Benton and his assistant dug near the creek. The assistant described finding what looked like 2 coffins fused together, the wood warped as though grown that way. Inside, something moved. Benton ordered the site closed. That night, he returned alone. When his team arrived at sunrise, his tools were scattered, his camp torn apart. They followed a trail of footprints, 2 sets, barefoot, one larger, one smaller, leading toward the center of the field. At the end of that trail lay only Benton's coat. Inside the pocket was a page from his field journal, smeared with soil. It read, "They're not buried. They're rooted." After that, the state sealed the area under the pretext of unstable ground. No further studies were conducted. Locals say you can still hear digging from beneath that red clay on quiet nights, like someone trying to claw their way back to the surface, and someone else gently pulling them back down. By 1973, the Delaney land had become more legend than location. Highway construction had rerouted most travelers away from Clark County, and the field was swallowed by pine and kudzu. Yet locals whispered that sometimes, just before dawn, the fog would gather low over the ground, round and thick, as though the earth were exhaling. That year, a nurse named Martha Lee rented a house nearby. She didn't believe in curses or hauntings. She believed in science and human cruelty, nothing more. But one night, she woke to the sound of an infant crying outside her window. The noise was muffled, wet, and rhythmic, rising and falling like waves. She followed it to the edge of the old field, barefoot, the grass cold with dew. There, The ground had sunken again, forming a pit no wider than a crib. From within it came the sound, soft, desperate, unmistakable. Martha knelt and brushed away the loose soil. Beneath it, she saw what looked like a linen cloth, moving faintly as though something beneath it struggled for air. Her hands trembled as she reached down. The moment her fingers touched the cloth, the crying stopped. The air grew still. When she lifted her hand again, the linen was gone. But pressed into her palm was a mark, a perfect outline of two tiny hands overlapping. By morning, her hair had turned half white. She left Clark County the same day and never spoke of it again. But her diary, found decades later, contained one final sentence. They are still giving birth to each other. In 1984, a distant descendant of the Delaney line, Jonathan Delaney III, returned to Alabama to reclaim his family's forgotten property. He was a banker from Atlanta, proud, polished, and determined to erase the stain of superstition from his ancestry. When he arrived, he found the estate reduced to rubble, just fragments of stone and the ghost of a foundation. Still, he planned to build anew. He ordered the land cleared, the soil tested, and the creek redirected. Workers refused to stay past sundown, complaining of voices underfoot. Jonathan dismissed them and continued the work himself. One evening, he uncovered an old root cellar near where the mansion once stood. Inside, he found two small coffins. He opened one. It was empty except for strands of white hair. The other held a bundle of fabric, still damp despite the century that had passed. When he unwrapped it, the smell of lilies filled the air. Inside was a doll, stitched from two halves of different cloths, one pale, one dark, sewn together crudely at the center. Its face was blank. Jonathan threw it into the fire. The smoke rose thick and black, curling into the shape of two intertwined figures before vanishing. That night, he dreamed of two women standing by his bed, whispering his name in perfect unison. He left Clark County before dawn. His mansion plans were abandoned, and the property was auctioned again. The only thing recovered from the site after his departure was the doll, unburned, perfectly intact, lying at the edge of the creek. In 1992, a folklorist named Dr. Meredith Lane began collecting oral histories from rural Alabama. The Delaney story intrigued her. It was too detailed, too consistent across generations to be pure legend. She arrived in Clark County with a tape recorder and a sense of purpose. She interviewed elderly townsfolk, their voices shaking with fear even as they swore they didn't believe in ghosts. One woman, born in 1908, told her something strange. The twins didn't die, miss. They switched places again and again, so no one could ever bury the right one. Dr. Lane pressed for clarity. The woman leaned close and whispered, "There was never two of them at once." That night, Lane listened back to her recordings. Between the crackle and hiss of old tape, she heard faint humming, two voices, soft and distant, singing in harmony. She rewound, slowed, and played it again. The humming grew clearer until she could make out words. "You heard us. Now you'll remember." The next morning, her motel room was empty. Her car remained in the lot. The only thing left behind was her tape recorder, still running, recording nothing but static and the sound of quiet, synchronized breathing. Authorities labeled her disappearance unexplained. Her notes were sealed by the university. But every few years, a copy of that tape resurfaces online, each version shorter than the last, as if something inside it keeps eating away at the silence. In 2005, a small archaeology team from Auburn University received a private grant to investigate pre-Civil War burial practices in Clark County. The Delaney field was chosen due to its documented plantation past. The team expected pottery, artifacts, maybe a few bones. What they found instead was an absence, a perfect void. Everywhere they dug, the soil was hollowed, loose, as though the earth had been repeatedly disturbed and then sealed again. Instruments registered subtle movements below, though no roots or fauna were detected. Then, late one afternoon, a student struck something solid. It wasn't wood. It wasn't stone. It was skin, pale, leathery, impossibly preserved. Beneath it, a second layer pulsed faintly. They fled the site. By morning, the trench had filled itself completely. Not collapsed, filled, as if poured smooth from beneath. Their equipment was later found 20 yards away, half buried in fresh earth. The university denied the incident. Officially, the project ended due to safety concerns. But in private emails leaked years later, one professor described the soil as alive in pairs. No one has since attempted to dig there. The coordinates of the Delaney site were quietly erased from public records. But locals still say, when rain falls heavy in Clark County, the field bleeds red, and two sets of footprints appear in the mud, circling each other endlessly, like a dance with no end. By 2010, Clark County had become little more than a ghost map, roads renamed, towns absorbed, and the Delaney land swallowed by pine and thyme. But in the heart of that wilderness stood a new structure, small and immaculate, built on the ruins of the old plantation chapel. A wooden sign out front read, Church of Rebirth. Its founder, Pastor Ezekiel Monroe, was a charismatic preacher who claimed to have heard the voice of the earth. His sermons drew crowds from neighboring counties. He spoke of twins born of one soul, of redemption through union, of returning to the womb of creation. Those who joined his congregation swore strange oaths. Services were held at midnight, and every member carried a token, two rings linked together by a single thread. When reporters asked about the church's origins, Monroe smiled and said, "The Delaneys found God before any of you did. We only followed their footsteps." Soon, parishioners began vanishing. At first 1, then 3, then 7 in a single summer. The sheriff raided the church in 2012. Inside, they found the altar smeared with red clay and lilies. Beneath it was a pit lined with hundreds of handprints, small, overlapping, pressed into the soil like fossils. Monroe disappeared before he could be arrested. His followers scattered. The church burned a month later, though no accelerant was found. And yet, every Easter morning, someone leaves 2 white lilies on the ashes. Always 2. Always fresh. No one claims to do it. No one dares to stop it. By 2016, the state acquired the Delaney tract for environmental study. They called it an ecological reclamation zone, but the field had other plans. Satellite scans revealed irregularities, long, intertwined patterns just below the surface, forming what looked like roots or veins. A research team was sent in with ground-penetrating radar. The readings came back impossible. Beneath the topsoil was a network of tunnels shaped almost like a body. 2 torsos joined at the chest, sprawling into the earth. Curiosity turned to horror when workers uncovered fragments of bone woven into the roots themselves. Human femurs, ribs, skulls, all fused with petrified wood, as though the ground had digested them. The site was immediately sealed. The lead researcher, Dr. Hanley, resigned without explanation. In a letter to a colleague, later leaked, he wrote, "They are growing. The earth is their womb. Every cycle, it births them anew." The government declared the area unstable and fenced it off. But hunters who trespassed swore they saw a light glowing beneath the soil, pale, rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. Some nights, if you stand by the fence and listen long enough, you can hear whispering rising from the roots. 2 voices speaking as one. We never left. We never stopped. No trees grow in the bone orchard. Only lilies, rows upon rows of them. White, perfect, and scentless. Each spring, there are more. In 2020, while digitizing the Clark County records, an archivist named Naomi Greer stumbled upon an unmarked file. Inside were photographs from the 1860s, grainy, sepia-toned, nearly erased by time. Most were of the Delaney mansion before its ruin. But one, labeled Postmortem Twins, showed something that shouldn't exist. It depicted 2 women lying side by side in a shallow grave, their hands clasped over a single infant. The faces were serene, almost identical, but one had open eyes, staring directly at the camera. Naomi enhanced the image for clarity. As the detail sharpened, a second set of eyes appeared, faint, reflected in the infant's pupils. She locked her office, printed the photo, and tried to file a report. But before she could, her computer crashed. Every file related to the Delaneys was wiped. When IT examined the server, they found one new folder, auto-generated. Its name was a single word, rebirth. Inside were 2 images, mirror copies of Naomi's own face. She resigned 2 weeks later, moved out of Alabama, and refused interviews. The county archive now lists the Delaney file as digitally corrupted. But on nights when the system reboots, the monitors in that office flicker for a few seconds, showing two women in 19th century dresses, standing behind the operator, always just for a moment, always smiling. In 2023, construction began on a solar farm across Clark County's Forgotten Acres. Heavy machinery rolled over land untouched for generations. The project went smoothly, until workers hit the old creek bed. The ground split open in a long, perfect seam. From the fissure came a sound like air escaping a tomb. The foreman ordered everyone back. Then they saw it, something pale pushing through the dirt. It wasn't bone. It wasn't wood. It was flesh. The ground convulsed. Lilies burst through the soil, blooming instantly, their roots slick with something dark and red. The project shut down. The site was declared contaminated. But a drone operator reviewing aerial footage noticed something unsettling. The crack had formed an unmistakable shape, two figures lying side by side, their hands joined. Over the following weeks, towns across Clark County reported strange power surges, lights flickering in rhythm. Dogs refused to cross the fields. People spoke of dreams filled with crying infants, with women whispering in their ears, "Help us be one again." No one could explain why. Every night at 3:22 a.m., motion sensors along the fence recorded twin shadows moving in perfect synchronization across the field. The cameras always failed to capture their faces. By 2024, the Delaney field had become a sealed government property. Yet those who lived nearby said the nights grew longer, the air thicker, the ground softer beneath their feet. At midnight, a sound rose from the soil, low at first, then layered, harmonic. Two female voices, singing in a language no one recognized. Some said it sounded like prayer. Others said it was the sound of labor, of birth drawn out over centuries. Those who listened too long claimed to hear their own names woven into the melody. A local sheriff recorded one such night on his phone. The next morning, he was found in his cruiser, eyes open, mouth filled with clay. The phone was still recording. The last 5 seconds captured only a whisper. "You can join us, if you remember our names." The recording spread online briefly before disappearing from every platform within hours. No trace remains except in retellings. Always slightly different, always ending the same way. Two women singing until the sound turns to sobbing, then silence. Now, no one goes near the Delaney land. No drones fly overhead. The lilies keep blooming, season after season, even through frost. And if you stand at the fence long enough, you'll feel it beneath your feet, a slow, steady pulse, syncing with your own. There is a rumor whispered in Clark County now, that the field has finally opened, that a storm last spring washed away a century of soil, exposing something that had waited too long to be seen. Those who went near said the ground was soft as skin. They saw the outline of two bodies, joined at the chest, eyes open, faces serene. Between them lay a single newborn, neither crying nor still, its skin the color of both clay and milk. By dawn, the storm passed. The bodies were gone. The lilies remained. No official statement was made. No one claimed to see it. Yet that week, hospital records across Alabama noted the births of 221 twins, all born prematurely, all surviving, all sharing the same strange mark over their hearts, two overlapping hands. Scientists called it coincidence. The church called it judgment. But the oldest families of Clark County called it what it always was, a return. And when the wind moves across that red field now, you can almost hear them. Two voices, soft and eternal, whispering in perfect unison. "We were never buried. We were never to. We are the soil beneath you." Then silence. Only lilies. Only red earth that never sleeps.